As above, so below.
Welcome to Connecting with Coincidence. I am your host, Bernard Beitman, MD. I'm a psychiatrist, and as I like to say, I still do psychotherapy, and psychiatrists aren't doing very much of that these days. And I love doing it, and it's very informative about meaningful coincidence, synchronicity, and serendipity, because meaningful coincidences can play a very good part in psychotherapy. There was an article in the Los Angeles Times on December 1st about my book and about coincidences. And a psychologist from Los Feliz in California wrote the author of this article. And this is what he had to say. He's a PhD psychologist. He's from Dublin, Ireland. And at age 15, he arrived in Los Angeles. He's 76, has been in many years of Jungian analysis. And he set up a Skid Row mental health clinic for the LA County Department of Mental Health. His name is Kevin Flynn, and you can contact him by putting that name in your web browser. In March 2021, he had a dream at 7:06 a.m. regarding the release of a butterfly from a wine bottle. A butterfly from a wine bottle. Remember, he's Irish, and that's still a joke, as you'll see. I woke up, noted the time, and wrote in my journal that my only brother had died age 79. So here's a butterfly leaving the bottle and going someplace. 5 minutes later, his sister-in-law called, the wife of his brother, to tell him that his brother, Matt Flynn, had passed away. So around the time Matt Flynn had died, he had the dream of a butterfly being released from a bottle. So he thanked the author, Deborah Netburn, for the article, and he said, Irish mysticism is still alive. Cheers, says he. Well, our guest today is a remarkable woman. You will see. She's a pediatric nurse practitioner, CEO of Rogue Nurse Media. Get Rogue because she ain't cut out of the usual stamp, as you again will see. She's a host and producer of the Nurses and Hypochondriacs Podcast. She is a writer and teaches writing and storytelling to healthcare professionals through the well-written Nurse. Ersilia is also a practicing shaman and helps patients journey through their own personal stories to heal PTSD, depression, and anxiety with a focus on personal empowerment. She'll tell you, but I ask her where she's coming from right now. Well, geographically, that is. Never know where Ersilia is coming from. That she lives in beautiful downtown Burbank, and she'll tell us what's in beautiful downtown Burbank, California, where she was born in Los Angeles. Burbank's just right there with LA. So welcome to the show, Ersilia, and please tell us where you are and what you're surrounded by, at least physically.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Beitman. I'm happy to be here. And I'm in Burbank, the media capital of the world. So I'm right smack in the middle of many television stations, Warner Brothers, Disney Studios, Universal Studios, Cartoon Network, Nickelodeon. Those are just off the top of my head. There's a lot of independent studios here as well. But
yeah. Well, I'm kind of curious because a couple of people have contacted me about doing a movie on meaningful coincidences or synchronicity. So keep that one in mind. That may coincidences sometimes bring those ideas together. So there's some movement towards that with what I'm doing. So you're in beautiful downtown Burbank, and you're surrounded by movie studios and other studios, and you think that life is a screenplay.
I do. I believe we're living in a simulated reality, much like the movie The Truman Show, much like the movie Stranger Than Fiction.
Uh-huh. And we like to ask who's writing the screenplay, but we'll leave that for another discussion. It seems like somebody is. And all I know is I don't know what the studio looks like, but I love being in this movie. So it's the best way I can think about it. But I like trying to figure out what's going on around here. How does it happen? And so are you. So why don't you tell us one of a recent coincidence story, Ersilia?
Sure. I think I started to realize that I was in my own personal screenplay, as I call it, and as I teach my students to see life, to make it more fun. I was dating a gentleman and I was on a walk one day and I was having these weird feelings. It was kind of like a quantum entanglement that I had with him. And all of a sudden I went in, I wanted to write him a letter. I felt like it. So I walked into a store. I bought some stationery, and on the stationery, it said, "Not today, Satan," right? And I looked over to the side, and what I had found was a scarab, a necklace, a scarab, a beetle, like a beetle, just like in Carl Jung's famous story. And I picked it up and I asked the shop person, I was like, "Have you ever thought of your life as a screenplay?" And she said, "No." And one of my friends told me, "Well, her life is boring." And that's when I really started to study coincidences. And I had you on my show. And after that, I really started to hone down on who we are in our personal stories, as in the hero. One day I wrote a blog about heroes because I was frustrated in the dating scene. And I was like, wrote off of Bonnie Tyler's song, "I Need a Hero." And so I wrote a blog about that. And the next day I went into clinic, and one of my patients, my last patient of the day, his name was Hero. And I, asked my medical assistant, "Can you read this patient's name?" And she read it and she's like, "It's Hero." I go, "You read that, right?" I go, "I just wrote a blog about it. And now this patient is here." So I went into the exam room. The mom knows about this story because I've explained to her how magical he was into helping me push me forward into what I'm doing right now. And so he was about 1 year old. I was diagnosing him for autism. I was doing a physical exam on him, and it seemed like he was autistic because he didn't answer to his name. Like, he wouldn't turn to his name. And I thought, isn't that interesting? The hero doesn't turn to his name, or the hero doesn't know his name. What does that mean? So I took this question to several writers that I know. One was a comic book, or two were comic book writers. And we were talking about superhero lore. And so one said, well, the hero could have amnesia in the story. The second is the hero doesn't know that they are the hero, which I found very fascinating. And the hero doesn't know they're the hero until they get their superhero powers. And that is when they get their name. And WandaVision, that comic, and it was on Disney, Wanda doesn't turn into the Scarlet Witch until she gets her superpowers. And I found that very interesting. And I started to look at that in my life. I kind of ignored it until my big story started to happen that I told you about.
Well, and we're gonna go through that, but I think it's what you're saying is beautifully described, Ersilia. I can see you going in and examining that child, and he turning away, and you having to raise the question about he doesn't know he's hero. He doesn't know he's a hero or the hero, and then in order for him to know that he's a hero, he's got to have his superpowers and be aware of the superpowers. And
exactly.
Then, so it's for me, it's like a Clark Kent thing. He doesn't know he's
very
Superman.
True. Very true. And many superheroes don't know that they are, like, Spider-Man is the same thing. Their origin story of how they come into being the superhero, and Batman is the same thing. I mean, you could look at all superheroes and they have that same storyline that follows.
They do have that story. And I don't want to get too distracted, but I think I will for a minute here. The X-Men, they know they have their powers. They have to discover them
Very
early
good.
on, but they have to discover them. And I don't know that any of them think of themselves as heroes in the X-Men stories, but I love the X-Men because it's a group of people with special powers working together to try to do something positive for the world.
And I believe that's what's going on in society now. Many people are waking up to their own superhero powers, and we're all interconnected and we can all use them together. It's pretty fascinating.
That's a major input push for me, is to use meaningful coincidences as a way to help people find not only their superpowers, but also their purpose for the superpowers
Exactly.
and how to connect with other people in that movie, so that the coincidences show us how we connect with each other, the invisible currents that connect and unite us. So we have that together, and I like to have different movies about the big movie. I mean, it's a meta movie of individual movies is what it ends up being, that we're each contributing to. And I like to see the pieces come together, and you're just helping to describe one. So what do you think of that? And let's go on to your story.
I think that's very interesting. And I love those movies, how everybody is interconnected in some way. One of my favorite movies is All About My Mother, which came out in 1999 by Pedro Almodovar. And he really looks at archetypes in that movie, mainly the female archetypes, which is the mother, the actress, the saint are the main three that he goes over. And these women are all interconnected. And it's a full circle story. It starts where it begins. I teach that in my classes, which is my favorite story. So yes, but it's all very, very interesting. My story has been interconnected with other people's stories, and I do teach this in my storytelling classes. And I've had clients come to me. I've been taking them as consulting clients who have been having these types of interconnected coincidences, and they think they're going crazy. And they'll tell their family members who are not very much awake, I guess you could say, or not connected with their higher self, and say they don't understand. So they come to me, and I was like, oh yeah, I've had many of them, and this is how you can navigate your life to make it much more fulfilling and better. The thing is to not get so obsessive about them, because that can be a tendency as well, and not read too much into it, but just kind of see it as more playful and see how the story unfolds. But that's how storytelling is. It's like a gradual unfolding of what's ahead. And of the story and the dialogue and the narrative and whatever the protagonist is going through, which is like the hero in your story.
So tell us your story.
So my story, which I think this is to date my most interesting coincidence. I have lots of them. I try to generate them as well.
How do you generate them, Ersilia?
Through meditation. Also, nutmeg is a great psychedelic that I found. Nutmeg. Yep. There's research on it. I was putting a lot of nutmeg in my coffee and eating a lot of pumpkin muffins. And I was like, I felt like I was rolling, and I've never used psychedelics. I've never used LSD or mushroom psilocybins or anything. And I just was seeing stuff. And I was like, what is happening with me? And one day I was speaking to one of my friends who's dealt with a lot of psychedelics. He had a whole book on psychedelics.
Well, it's to say that nutmeg is kind of a psychedelic for you.
And for me, yes,
you,
but
yeah.
it is. But it is there's
and it works for other people that way too. And finding your drug of choice, and it might be something like nutmeg, is very important for people to be able to do. But let's go to your story.
Sure. So back in June of this year, matched with a guy on Bumble. I had matched with him before many years ago. We never went out, but we were Facebook friends. So I went ahead and reached out to him and was like, hey, I saw that we matched on Bumble, but you deleted me. So why don't we go out for coffee? he lives right next to my city. He's a teacher. We have things in common. He teaches his students how to play chess, and I thought that was very interesting. So we have coffee, and I had listened to a podcast that he was on because he also does bench press, and he had won many championships. And as I'm talking to him, I'm intuiting that he needs to write a book, and then he tells me to listen to this other podcast. And I'm like, okay. So I do. And in the podcast, he's speaking to a newscaster in Miami. And as he's speaking, he starts talking about these two children who were his students who died in a car accident, a drunk driving accident in Joshua Tree, California.
The podcaster does.
My friend,
Your friend does. Okay.
Yeah. So the teacher, these were his students that he was talking about.
Okay.
And so all of a sudden, as he's telling this story to the newscaster, there's electrical difficulty. Like it's weird. And I've been doing podcasts since 2017. That doesn't really happen. And if you're a newscaster, I'm thinking to myself, wouldn't you just give it to your editor, to clean up, or just stop the whole podcast and try to reconnect again? But she was
let's comment on that for a minute. One of my podcasts has a Jungian and talking about how under high emotion on Zoom, and particularly even before with Skype, which was weaker, that high emotion would be correlated with a disruption in the communication between the people talking. So that's
really interesting.
That's not uncommon for that to happen. This is highly emotional. These things are psychokinetic, however you want to talk about it. So just for our audience to know, that's not such an odd thing to happen. So please continue.
Well, I've never heard it on a podcast, so I thought it was odd that when he starts talking about these two deceased children, that there's this weird, like, static going on.
Yeah.
And it's not a YouTube podcast, it's an Audible podcast, right? So I went ahead and did some research, and I watched films. Here we go again about films, how much they are so a part of our reality. I was watching Poltergeist and researching it, white noise, and I started to look at these frequencies that can happen if there's someone, if you believe, on the other side trying to make contact. So I then call this gentleman up that I went on a date with, and I tell him, my findings. I was like, I think they're trying to make contact with you from the other side. And I am psychic intuitive, and I do get communications. I don't really channel it so much because it's just a bit too much. I'm super sensitive. So, he was just like, okay.
But you're saying you do
of it.
You're saying you do get communications from the other side. Okay.
I do. And so I thought nothing of it. A couple of weeks later, I go to a theater. They're having a Hollywood Fringe Festival here in Hollywood. And I go see a one-person show and it's called Grief, a one-man show. Before I go into the theater, I go into the bar next door, and, there's a wall with a bunch of flyers. And I look at the flyer for the show, and right next to the flyer for this show is another flyer that says coincidences. Okay.
Well, I like that.
So I thought, well, this is interesting. Like I say, my life is a screenplay. So I thought it was very funny. And I wonder what's going to happen next. So I go and watch the show, and the man is talking about how his two children were in a car accident with him and were hit by a drunk driver while they were in Joshua Tree, California.
Well, let's pause. Let's pause on that one, Ersilia, because that's a very important illustration. Very important illustration of how what happens outside of us is often a mirror of what's going on inside of us. And how that happens is part of the fun of understanding coincidences, mirrors of our minds. And here you were going to a play, having wondered about the static in the podcast, and there we were mirrored by this grief one-man show. So
Right.
that, and then you had, just so you paid attention, you got to see something that said coincidence on the board there. And so you say, wow, this looks like a coincidence to me, or Celia, you get hit on the head with it.
I
So-
do, and that's just what happens sometimes. It's like, pay attention,
Pay
know.
attention. I mean, I really like the hammer on the head version of this. So okay, so there you are, hit over the head with a coincidence. So then what happened?
So I leave the next morning. I try to tap into one of the kids, whose name is Ruby. The children's names are Ruby and Hart, who died. And I hear in my head, my dad is a fucking now. I don't have to say
You hear in your
my
head,
dad
what?
is an a-hole. So and I was just like, that's really interesting. Okay. And so then I go ahead and call the guy. I went on a date again, and I say, hey, is this the dad of the two kids? Are these your students? He's like, yeah, that's Ruby and Hart. Just nonchalant, like as if he almost knew that he's like a mentor of sorts, sending me on this journey, which is bizarre. And that seems like what's happening. So I was like, well, I need to speak to you, and I go, I think that Ruby's trying to make contact. So I speak to him the next day, and I can't speak to him. Like I'm having shortness of breath, and I'm feeling this other energy, which tends to happen sometimes when I get these channelings. And so I go, I think Ruby's been trying to make contact with you. She's very excited. And he goes, yes, the children were very close. I was close to them. I was their personal math tutor. And we had these personal jokes, like make it count. So this gentleman is very in his ego. This is what we have to understand, which I thought this was interesting. Stuck. Like he's just very serious all the time. And these kids were always playing practical jokes on him to get him out of his ego, to make that childlike self come out. And he had known Ruby ever since she was like 5 years old, because he teaches at an exclusive school where only Hollywood people go to. And it was all very interesting. So I give him the message. He even told me you did a eulogy at their funeral. The interesting thing was he told me there's a Jewish cemetery here in Los Angeles, and I had driven by that Jewish cemetery probably a day or two before I was speaking to him, because I do work what's called locum tenens, and I was working at another clinic. And I was like, oh, I just drove by that cemetery the other day. It's a very interesting cemetery. It's old, and there's headstones that stick out. So I mean, I didn't know what to do with this story. And I just was like, oh, it's just one of my interesting coincidence stories. And I just left it there. And I felt I was just like a psychic secretary passing on a message to this gentleman,
And you didn't, and you weren't able to think about its impact on you personally.
I didn't.
You were just a medium or a connector between
right.
you and this other guy. And to summarize the story, you meet a guy in a coffee shop. He tells you to listen to the podcast that he's on, and you hear the story of Ruby, of the two kids dying in Joshua Tree, and the same story that you had heard before from the guy who's the teacher of Ruby and her brother and Hart. So you hear a parallel story on a podcast about Ruby that's like Ruby and Hart.
He didn't say their names. He just said my students, and he dedicates. The reason why he was talking about them was because he dedicates his trophies from bench press to them.
Okay. So the teacher has two students that die in a car crash in Joshua Tree National Park, not too far from LA, from a drunk driver. Okay, that's the one. Then you go to the one-man grief show, and you hear almost the same story. His two children killed by a drunk driver in Joshua Tree National Park. And you see the coincidence thing on the wall, and you say, that's a coincidence. So you call this ego-filled teacher who gave a eulogy to the two children,
Right.
and try to be able to communicate with him about it. But he didn't, from what I so far I get, he wasn't that interested in your parallel there.
He was like, okay, so this is what I've studied, which I've been looking at recently. I feel that people will speak to me through their higher self or their subconscious mind. Their voice changes. I don't know if you've ever had that experience.
I understand that.
And so this is what he was doing. So there was a part of him that really wanted to believe and wanted to communicate with me on this, but then there's that ego part that was holding him back.
Understood.
You know,
and part of what we're doing, you and I and others like that, is trying to be able to reduce the ego and expand,
bringing them together, right?
bringing
Conscious and the subconscious, right?
the good old Freud and Carl Jung too. I mean, that's the idea. When you call the subconscious the higher self, I get crazy, because to me those are different things. It's not that they're unrelated; they are very related. But bringing them together is something else. I think there is a higher self for all of us that we can appeal to, that covers the whole thing that is us, including what we call subconscious, unconscious, and higher self. But that's to be that we can maybe get into
that's
that
another
later.
thing that I'm studying, and I'm not clear on.
And let's leave that
that's
alone.
something different. Yeah.
So where are we in our story here? You're the psychic secretary.
Okay. So yeah, I've kind of let it go. I'm the psychic secretary. I've already passed on this message, and I felt that was it, you know? And so then a few weeks later, I go to my clinic in Palm Springs, and my nurse, I've been working with him since 2017. He knows all my wacky stories, and he always gets excited when I have a wacky story, and he asks me, do you have any story? Like, people are always asking me, do you have any interesting stories to tell me? So I go in, and I was like, oh, I got to tell you this story. And as soon as I start telling him, he goes, were those kids in a 2019 silver Prius? And I was like, yeah.
Which kids? The grief or
the kids, the Ruby and Hart.
Ruby and
the
Hart.
Kids who had died in the drunk driving accident.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, yes. And he goes, well, in 2019, right? And I said, yes. And he goes, oh, and he pulls up the case, and he goes, did you know that the woman who killed them, she used to bring her children to our clinic?
Wow.
But not only that, her mother used to do our billing.
So this is coming closer to home for you.
Right. And at this point, I start getting freaked out. I was like, okay, why am I in this story? Who am I? So then I start to really look at who am I in this story?
Why am I in this story? Asked Ersilia. I am now in this story. So please explain why Ersilia is in this story.
I think I've kind of figured it out. So my nurse is an incredible researcher, and he pulls up this woman's case, and her name is Nicole Parker, and she had, I think, 4 prior DUIs, and there was a warrant out for her arrest when she killed these children, and she did not go into jail until 2020 December, which is weird. She was out of jail for almost a year, because I guess they had to prove this case, and maybe because of COVID it complicated things. So we looked her up, and they had not tried her. I mean, she's on $2.5 million bail, sitting in a jail, but had not tried her case, and her case gets put back every 6 months, which is weird. I mean, she committed murder, but she's sitting in a jail for almost 2 or 3 years now. And I thought that was very interesting. So last night I started to research it again. And this is a huge problem that I don't think very many people are talking about in the prison systems here in California. There's over 44,000 people sitting in jails.
Because there aren't enough judges
for trials. There's not enough judges, and attorneys have over 400 cases each. But not only that, you know, you're entitled to a speedy 10-day trial within 10 days if you're sitting in jail, but you can forgo that. And a lot of these criminal attorneys will use that as a tactic and try to prolong these cases as long as possible, so then people forget about the case, which I thought was very interesting. I was like, whoa. And it's a huge thing. We hear about healthcare and how crazy it is, but I think everything's falling apart. The justice system is falling apart. Not very many people are talking about that, but I found a whole expose from CalWorks, I think it was last night. So it's all very interesting. But to bring the story, full story, what had happened.
Why don't we get back to the story?
Right. So full story. I think so. Maybe I need to pose this question to you because you're an expert in coincidences. At the end of April of 2022, I went on a camping trip to Joshua Tree. And in the morning, I woke up and I went to the Circle K where these children were murdered. And this was before I knew this whole story. And I see a monument. And it says, I still remember, like, I didn't remember when this was happening in June. But then I remember, I go, wait a minute. I went there in camping, and I remember seeing this monument, and I think it did say Ruby and Heart, and there was like a little saying or something. And I remember looking at it, because I had to really go back into my memory. And I remember saying, I wonder what happened. So here's the thing. Do we create these stories? Like, had I never gone to Joshua Tree, would this story even have happened? I don't know.
Didn't you go to Joshua Tree? You went to Joshua Tree before you had coffee. Before you had coffee with the guy in the coffee shop. Okay.
So it was in my subconscious. Like, I had already seen this monument with these children's names on it, but I didn't remember when I was at the coffee shop.
Well, I have invented a term called human GPS, or inner GPS might be a better name, where we get to where we need to be without knowing how we got there. And here you are bumbling around on Bumble, and you're ending up at a coffee shop and hearing the story of Ruby and Hart from this guy who was their teacher. And you had not too long before that seen a memorial, a monument with their names on it. So you became curious when you saw that monument for the two of them. You thought they might have been lovers. You thought.
Yes, I did. I didn't say that, but you brought that up. You read my mind. See, telepathy. I did think that, but I did not say that.
I appreciate the telepathy thing. I like to do it, but in the story you wrote to me, I'm reading it while you're talking.
Okay.
You put
That's
it in
where
there.
You got that from.
I don't think I can be telepathic listening to all these details because I'm just trying to absorb what you're telling me. It's like you thought they were lovers, so you wondered about them, so you became curious about them. Now, the idea that you would create the beginning of this movie by bumbling to Bumble and going on the coffee shop and talking to this guy who would tell you the story of his two students dying in Joshua Tree National Park from a drunk driver, that you could find this guy to tell you the story, from my perspective, begins to suggest again how sensitive you are to the stuff going on around you. This is a very, very sensitive thing to pick up. A lot of people, for human GPS, can go rescue their brother who's about to commit suicide and not knowing how the brother got to the sibling out by a lake in a forest someplace who'd never been there before, neither of them before. So, I mean, that's really a rescue thing. And that's human GPS. Or like, I lost my dog and I got lost and we found each other. That was very important to me. But for you raised the question and talks about, it suggests how sensitive the environment is to what you think and how that influences your behavior. That's what this suggests to me. You've talked about sensitivity, but this is high level sensitivity. So the first thing it suggests to me is it's an illustration of how sensitive Ersilia is to her own thoughts, creating the environment, creating situations that connect with what she's thinking about.
That is correct. Right. And I've learned to just hone that. And
Yeah, you got to be careful.
you have to be very careful. I mean, my environment that I create is very peaceful. Like I said, I mean, I'm having to sell my home because it's just not for me here anymore. But yeah, I have to be very careful who I let into my reality and why, because things can go kind of nutty.
They can, and here is an illustration of how what you think connects, and the underlying theme for me in this, Ersilia, is romance, because you thought the two of them, Ruby and Hart, were romantically involved, and you were bumbling to find this guy, maybe as a
That's
a guy.
a good connection. Yes.
So the parallel is emotion, searching for love. You're here in beautiful downtown Burbank. Here's a woman, a nurse, searching for love.
And one of the characters is named Hart. Isn't that interesting?
Character in what?
Well, one of the child that died, his name is Hart.
Yeah, yes.
Get it?
Oh, you gotta have Hart. Yeah.
Right.
Somebody very important to me is named Hart too, who I feel a lot for. So you got to have Hart, miles and miles and miles of Hart. Now you're in some kind of screenplay, as you said. I prefer, as I mentioned to you before, I like being in a musical, because I come up with songs every once in a while that seem to fit the circumstances. But we each have our own kind of movie to be running around in, which is what I think so interesting about what you're telling us, and so important about what you're telling us. And let me repeat, she's coming to us, ladies and gentlemen, from beautiful downtown Burbank, California, where there are many, many movie studios and other studios. So fantasy is being created all around her.
I think that's a good analogy. Yeah.
So when you live in the middle of that, and I believe, been in beautiful downtown Burbank, one of those California swimming pool, palm trees outside, everything's warm, isn't it? Beautiful places. And it's weird there. I mean, it's weird. I lived in Santa Monica for a little while, but that's near the ocean, so you have a break. But being in Burbank is like, it's strange. And now I'm hearing from you, as I got more tuned to it, how environment comes into our minds.
Very true. Yeah.
It's no surprise that someone whose boundaries are as permeable as yours, whose boundaries are as permeable as yours, or porous as yours, as some people might say, would be thinking and living that her life is a movie, because you're in the movie capital of the world, right there. And it's been there a long time. When there were a lot of orange groves around, they were making movies there. And that history is there. So given how sensitive to you are, as you can see what I'm saying, what's no surprise now that you would say you're in the Truman movie, or a movie like it.
It's very true. I mean, I've been going to movie sets as a child, so movies have been filmed all around me my whole entire life. So yeah, I think it's very interesting, and that should be an interesting section for research for you. Like, how are there more coincidences in California, in Los Angeles, per se, because we live in a place where so many movies are made? Do people generate more coincidences and have these types of phenomena going on?
Well, that's a very good question, because as your old mentor, Alfred Hitchcock, would say, not that you ever met him, but he's still in your mind. He said the movies are like life, with the boring parts taken out.
Right.
Movies are often filled with coincidences, narrative movies. And I've been wanting to have a film festival in which the audience has some buttons that they can push when they see a coincidence happening on the screen. I mean, how often, especially in Woody Allen movies, does somebody in New York City show up that's important to the protagonist? Charles Dickens, in writing about London, people would run into each other in that busy town, that busy city, because that's a lot of way reality works, more as Alfred Hitchcock was saying. But I think it gets exaggerated because the boring parts get taken out. So there's going to be more coincidences in Burbank, I think, for just the reasons that you're suggesting. So that's a good idea. Getting funding for doing stuff like this is now my current problem. The Coincidence Project got a little cash, so now I'm thinking about research projects. But let's just raise that very interesting question. Now, there's more to your story about this guy and Ruby and Hart. You wanted to write to the DA.
I was trying to think of what my role
that's what we need to be able to figure out.
So, as like I said, with the whole hero phenomena, I was like, I don't know, but I did find a journalist who did an expose on this whole story of people just sitting in jails and waiting to be tried. So I was like thinking maybe I'll reach out to him and see what else manifests, or I don't know. And one of the things.
But you can't.
No, it's still manifest because I don't know what to do with it, because I've told people, I think I'm going to write a letter to the DA, and people have told me not to.
And you didn't. You didn't.
Not.
But you wrote to a previous podcast guest, a psychologist in London.
Oh, that's right.
To be able to try to understand what's going on with this movie. And she told you to tap into Ruby and ask her what she wanted. So you did. You asked Ruby what she wanted, and what did she say?
So Ruby was a writer as well. Both of her parents are in the movie industry. Her mom is a producer. And Ruby said she wanted to be a writer. I mean, she wanted to be immortalized in my stories, and that's what I got, and
so here we are kind of immortalizing her, because
very true.
you two is going to be around for a while, and we are talking about Ruby. So Ruby Tuesday, we are talking about you, and it's not even Tuesday. So here we are memorializing you, and so this, at least you're here in a kind of more permanent way.
Exactly.
So John C. Reilly.
Right. So that was interesting too. So I saw when I went into that bar, I saw John C. Reilly, and he's an actor, and he's done many
when
things.
He went into the bar where you saw a coincidence on the wall.
So I saw John C. Reilly there, and I thought that was it felt very dreamlike when I went into this bar.
Again, that's where you saw the coincidence thing on the wall.
Correct.
And that was before or after you went to the one-person show?
That was right before.
Right before. Well, okay, that's really cool. Coincidence said there's going to be a coincidence. Okay, I didn't get the sequence there. Okay, so, and then John C. Reilly was an actor, as you wouldn't be surprised to run into an actor in downtown beautiful Burbank. And
well, that was in Hollywood. So, but
so far away, far away. I mean, I hate to walk it, but that's what everybody does. Right. Yeah, down the street. Okay, so there's John C. Reilly.
In this bar, just seemed a little bit random for such a big actor like him to be in this bar. So it felt very dreamlike. And again, I'm always trying to piece these coincidences like a puzzle. What did he mean?
Yeah.
And so I went ahead and looked at his IMDb and the movies that he's been in, and read his Wikipedia, which is very, very interesting. And you would never think it because he's a comedic actor, but he's done a lot of interesting roles. And one of the roles in particular that stood out to me was Wreck-It Ralph. So he does the voice in this cartoon called Wreck-It Ralph. and I watched the movie Wreck-It Ralph, and the guy that had taken me camping, who I was dating for a while.
This is different from the guy in the coffee shop.
This is different. Yeah. You know, I'm a Pisces like you. I'm a romantic, so I like to date.
Oh, I forgot. I should have known. What is your birth date, Ersilia?
March 5th.
Oh gosh, I'm sorry for you. Now I have much more sympathy for you now. Again, thanks for reminding me.
Right?
This is a who knows what's where with us guys. I mean,
I know.
and the boundary problems just come with the business of being a fish. So that's like
True.
okay. So I got it. So anyway, you're acting.
So I was looking at this gentleman and that I was dating, and you know, the really nice guy, very sweet to me, but he was drinking a lot, quite a bit. And I had uncovered that he was an alcoholic. Like I didn't see him all that often. And you know, it looked like he had been an alcoholic for quite some time. And it was sad to me, you know. And I was like, oh my gosh, he's like Wreck-It Ralph, because he would work in Joshua Tree and spend a lot of time living in his van, kind of doing the van life. But he
Wreck-It Ralph would do it.
Wreck-It Ralph would, yes,
go to
and he
Joshua
would do
Tree.
it too. No, Wreck-It Ralph did go to Joshua Tree. Wreck-It Ralph would sleep outside, and nobody, like, he was kind of like an outsider because
But John C. Riley went to Joshua Tree. Is that what you're saying too? No,
no. John C. Riley did the voice. The guy I was dating
was go to Joshua Tree.
Yeah.
This reporter from the LA Times has a tree in Joshua Tree, that she communicates with. And I was very happy to hear that, because there's some trees that I have a relationship with around here, and she does too. So I mean, we're
trees are great.
We're swirling around Joshua Tree here too. Okay, so
got to come out to Joshua Tree before it gets too hot, though.
Oh, definitely. There's a lot of little things getting me to go to LA, but that's another story.
Yeah.
So that's so the guy you're dating goes to Joshua Tree to camp, and we got to connect that with Wreck-It Ralph, and we got to connect that with John C. Riley actor.
Right. So the guy I was dating was a contractor, and he was doing a lot of work in Joshua Tree, so he would spend a lot of time in his van. But he was kind of like isolating himself quite a bit and just living out in the land. And in Wreck-It Ralph, that's what Wreck-It Ralph does. Wreck-It Ralph just breaks everything. So it's a video game. There's Fix-It Felix and Wreck-It Ralph. So the guy you're dating
and Wreck-It Ralph have parallels with each other. They build and they wreck. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Exactly. And they sleep outside.
Okay. So another mind mirror for you.
Right.
Now we're getting close to the end of this. And in the way I think about coincidences, the Wreck-It Ralph coincidence with John C. Riley and the guy you're dating can be a commentary on the Ruby and Hart coincidence. Can you see any connection between the two?
Not so much. I don't know. What are you thinking?
I'm first just trying to get both of us to think that here you are juxtaposing the John C. Riley, because he showed up when you saw a coincidence on the board, and he had parallels through Wreck-It Ralph to the guy you were dating. Again, what we have here is Ersilia's romance thing. I mean, that's what holds us all together.
Yeah. And that's what I've been told, that I'm creating this reality, you know.
Well, it's part of your search for love is part of what I think this is.
Mm-hmm.
It's just
definitely.
I mean, it's the Pisces problem with that is immense for some of us. So let's just acknowledge that. But part of what you have to do is you're searching. So we have 3 stories that are about Ersilia's search for love.
Right. I guess you could say that. Yeah.
I just did. So let's just say I said that, and let's just say it's time for you to comment on that possibility. Because your first question was, what's this? Why am I in this movie?
Right. Why am I in this movie?
And does this romance thing tell you anything more?
Yes and no. I mean,
Let's do the yes, because it's a lot
okay.
easy to do no on this stuff.
Yes, because it is my search for love, and I do see it as a journey of sorts, because I believe that I've been single a long time, so I believe anybody that does come into your life does have either something to teach you and vice versa, like our lives are all intermingled, and I did write a letter to this gentleman because I'm no longer seeing him, but I did write him like a letter, and I had told him that he needed to, at the very least, just stop drinking and driving. So, and that was it. And I hope that, like, because I felt responsible then. If I knew that he was doing this, and God forbid another situation happened where someone had to lose their life at the hand of a drunk driver, I just don't want to feel, kind of
Well,
responsible.
let's be a little more clear about my role in this movie.
Okay, yeah. What's your role?
I am now in this movie too, because we're talking about this movie.
True. Yes.
So I'm in it, and my search for love has been going on for more than a few weeks now. It's been going on all my life, and it's like another one, kind of like what you're describing.
But we talked about it on my podcast too. I remember, because you're an avid salsa dancer, right? Or an avid
salsa,
dancer.
but dancing, yeah.
Mhm.
And that's yes. Just we'll say yes. It's still going on, and it gets deeper and deeper, and it's a great educational experience. So I'm wondering, at least for you and me, as potential reflections of each other, wondering about love, wanting to love,
Yes.
having open hearts to love, needing to love, wanting to have. I need somebody to love. I mean,
I love it.
we need somebody to love, but
Mhm.
unfortunately, sometimes the love gets overtaken by just wanting to love and not recognizing the other person's response to it.
Right.
And that person has his or her own thing going on with him or her.
Very true. I believe a lot of men are shut down. I mean, from my personal experience.
A lot of men are shut down, but the women that I've been involved with, there's a kind of shutdown, or there's something that's different. As with men and different women, it's more complicated. It ends up being the same thing. There's something about having to recognize your impact, the love you're feeling on that other person. And it becomes a question for me. I'm wondering that just recently. It's like, what's all this loving need I have? What is it? What is this? Is looking for, need somebody to love. It's really it's there. And I wonder how. I think it's not, nothing's characteristic of everything, of every sign, but you're the third. We have three Pisces now, with wanting to love and be loved by lots of people, not just one person, the need to be loved. But it's nice to have one single person that's the main one to love. That's what I'm thinking about. But I got to love a lot of people. It's just the way it is, because I got a lot there, and I want to do it. So what do we make out of this need for love? What do you think about that?
Well, we're all human beings. I mean, we all need each other. I feel
but you're
that,
you're not married, and I'm separated, so we're not exactly the same as everybody else. And your stories tell me anyway, that these are your searches for love, each one of them.
Correct.
That doesn't come out, and you got to have a ruby heart, a red heart, full of love.
My gosh! Oh my gosh! That's I love that. Got to have a ruby heart. Wow.
And it's beating strongly to find where you can go with this love. And I that's what I see you doing, and that's what I'm doing, I'm thinking. And we're in this movie now, a similar movie, different coasts, but there's something. Anyway, that's about as far as I can go. What's your reaction?
I think it's really true. For my personal experience, I've learned to just have a lot of self-love, for myself. And like you talked about boundaries are difficult for Pisces. I've learned to set better boundaries. Sometimes they're strong, but I have to do it. I am in search for a partner, a loving partner, but it has to be the right partner.
And I bet you're pretty picky, Ersilia.
I'm incredibly picky because I am a very unique person. I'm not that just, oh, I'm just a nurse. I work 9 to 5. I go and I come home and watch Netflix. That's not me. I know my purpose. Like I told you, I see myself as a superhero. I do some wacky things
what's your
sometimes.
superhero talent, Ersilia?
It is writing is my superhero power, I will have to say, and telling stories. So
Well, I'm going to suggest to you that that you also have the superpower of high sensitivity to some things,
yeah,
very high. And what I get from all your stories and your ability to find the first guy in the coffee shop, that's really the beginning of this story, even though you'd been in Joshua Tree, I think, before that and seen the monument, but that's maybe where it starts. I mean, you can't
right.
tell where any of this starts because it's always going on, but we can start with monument, the coffee shop, the grief, one man thing, and before that, the actor coming in and connecting you with Joshua Tree again, and I'll connect you with the talking tree and Joshua just for the fun of it, because I can imagine that. So this is I think we're looking at the webs of coincidences that
Correct.
you live, and they are so complicated that you can't figure them out because you're in the middle of it. You're like a spider with the webs outside. You know what you've spun, but you don't know what's out there really. Just hope you catch a fly or something. So we're talking about the web of coincidences that you spin, and you don't spin them consciously, but you just do them because that's what you do. So I'm thinking the high sensitivity illustrated by the inner GPS you had to bumble this guy in the coffee shop is like an illustration of a high sensitivity that Ersilia has.
I agree. I'm hypersensitive. I mean, I've been ever since I was a little child.
I think what you need to do is recognize that you've got this high sensitivity to lots of inputs, and then begin to hone it for particular kinds of inputs instead of having it maybe be as more disorganized as it probably is right now. But to recognize that it's not the writing, it's there, as that's important. But you as a being strike me as having a super sensitivity that you can hone to the kind of content you would like to have. And if that's true, what kind of content would you like to have?
Content
of your movie that you're sensitive to create. You have sensitivity to creating a movie. That's what you can. That's what you've got. So what kind of movie do you want your sensitivity, your producer, your writer to create?
I do like musicals as well, like you said.
But what do you want?
Romance. And I guess I could say romantic comedies. Sure.
That's the best. I'm with you on that one. Because sometimes
who doesn't love a rom-com? Come on, right?
Well, if you it's a good entree, the rom-com, that general genre, but then within it, to have a lot of these coincidences, not just there are a lot of coincidences in rom-com, so it's like they're often there, but to create romantic comedies that are instructive, that you can write about.
Very good.
That you can write about and do a screenplay.
Very good. And that's what I'm working on, a couple of screenplays actually. And and I'm also working on a conscious dating book where I'm putting in these stories of coincidence in that I share, and to show that we're all interconnected, and how we really need to be present, and how love is good. There's so many people out there. Have you read the articles on how men are not dating, not having sex, are more isolated, I think that's very sad. That doesn't have to be
Women
that
are
way.
intimidating, man.
Women are getting angry. I don't know why. I mean,
Oh yeah, it's part of the
you know,
zeitgeist. Yeah.
yeah, and I think it's very sad,
Well, we're going to end, but I think what I end with, what I hear is that use synchronicity, use coincidences
yes,
to help men understand and find what they might be looking for in another person as guideposts. So what can you do for us guys through your screenplays that make it so that we can look for coincidences that might lead us to more loving life?
well, I think the problem is men need to be more in their heart, and sometimes men tend to be more in their ego.
Well, besides the problem, yes, I agree with you.
You know,
What are you going to do? What are you going to do
be more
about that?
present, be more conscious,
You can say that
and just have fun.
And
Enjoy life.
I very much agree with you. I very much agree with you.
So that's what they can do. That's
Then you need romantic comedies in which the man is transformed from in his head to in his heart using
Exactly.
using coincidences.
There you go. Boom.
That's what you got. And you've got a bunch of experiences that can help in that direction.
Right. Right. And I think that's excellent. Yeah.
Well, I hope you do it. And I think it's far out and groovy, as we used to say in Santa Monica, 9th and Santa Monica. It's where I used to be. Far out and groovy. And thank you very much for being on the show, Ersilia.
Well, thank you, Dr. Beitman. It's always great to connect with you and talk to you about this stuff. It's super awesome. So,
and thank you. And having two fish trying to struggle in what we were with love is like right there. So
yeah.
Thanks again for being with me.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
This psychosphere is our mental atmosphere, like a hologram of cosmic consciousness.